The morning of my sister's wedding, my mother handed me a black serving tray instead of a dress. She didn't smile when she gave it to me, didn't even look me in the eyes. "Wear something simple," she said flatly. "Don't attract attention today. This day is about your sister, not you." I stood there in the hallway, holding that tray like it weighed 50 pounds, even though it was empty. The house was full of noise. Makeup artists, cousins, photographers. But somehow I felt invisible in the middle of all of it. "I thought I was sitting with the family," I said quietly. My father adjusted his tie in the mirror and answered for her. "Family sits in the front. People who make us proud sit in the front." That one landed exactly how he meant it to. I swallowed, but said nothing. I learned years ago that defending myself in this house only made things worse. My sister Leela walked past in a silk robe, glowing, laughing, holding her phone up for selfies. Behind her, relatives followed like she was already royalty. No one noticed me. No one ever did. 3 years ago, I left the country to study. Not for vacation, not for fun. I worked, studied, barely slept, survived on cheap meals and scholarships. But my parents told everyone I had dropped out and was figuring things out. It made a cleaner story, a more convenient one. Caterers are short one's server. You'll help pass drinks during the reception. It's only for a few hours. Try not to embarrass us. Embarrass them? I almost laughed at that, because they had spent most of my life pretending I didn't exist, and somehow I was the risk. By the time we reached the hotel ballroom, the place looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal lights, white roses, gold chairs, a string quartet warming up near the stage. Guests arrived in designer suits and silk dresses, and me? Black skirt, white shirt, serving tray. One of the actual catering staff walked up to me and asked, "You're with us?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. "Yes," I said, because explaining would have hurt more. The ceremony started. I watched from the side curtains, standing, while strangers sat in seats that should have had my name on them. My parents sat in the front row. They never once turned around to look for me. When the vows finished, applause filled the hall like thunder. And right on cue, the catering manager snapped his fingers. "Drinks out! Move, move, move!" I lifted the tray, walked into my sister's wedding like hired help, and that's when the first guest looked at me and said, "Champagne, quickly." Not please, not thank you, just quickly. I leaned forward to hand him the glass, and he didn't even look at my face. But across the room, someone did. An older man near the stage had gone completely still. He was staring at me like he had just seen a ghost. And when our eyes met, his expression changed to shock, then recognition, then something else, something heavy. He stood up and started walking toward me. At first, I thought maybe he just needed a drink. That happens all the time at weddings. Someone important doesn't want to wait, so they come directly to the tray instead of letting the tray come to them. So I stepped forward automatically, trained by years of being the one who adjusts, the one who serves, the one who doesn't make scenes. "Champagne?" I asked politely, but he didn't even look at the glasses. He looked at my face. Not the uniform, not the tray. My face. His eyes narrowed slightly, like someone flipping through old memories trying to match a photograph. "Excuse me," he said slowly. "Have we met before?" My stomach tightened. People ask that sometimes, especially older guests, but usually it's small talk, nothing more. Still, something about his tone wasn't casual. It was careful, focused. "I don't think so, sir," I answered softly. Up close, I noticed a thin surgical scar near his collarbone, just visible above the neckline. Old, but precise, cleanly healed. My breath paused for half a second. No, it couldn't be. Before I could think further, my mother suddenly appeared at my elbow like she had been summoned by danger itself. "She's staff," my mother said quickly, smiling too wide. "Temporary help. Please enjoy the event." Staff? Temporary? Help. The man didn't look at her. Not even once. His eyes stayed on me. "What's your name?" he asked. My mother answered again, too fast. "She's just assisting the caterers." He turned his head slowly and looked at her now, and the temperature in his expression dropped 10 degrees. "I wasn't asking you," he said calmly. Silence stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. My throat felt dry. "Maya," I said. The moment my name left my mouth, something clicked in his face. Not confusion. Recognition. Real recognition. He took one step closer. "Maya Rao?" he asked quietly. My fingers tightened around the tray edge. Very few people here knew my full name. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, low, warning. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." But the man ignored him completely. "You worked at St. Vincent Medical Center 2 winters ago, emergency surgery rotation." My pulse jumped hard, because that was true, but it was also something my parents had told everyone never happened. I started. My mother grabbed my wrist under the tray and squeezed, hard enough to hurt. "Go back to the kitchen," she whispered through her teeth. "Now." But the man saw that too. His gaze dropped to her hand on my wrist, then back to her face. And when he spoke again, his voice carried. Not loud, but powerful enough that nearby guests turned to listen. "Why," he asked slowly, "is the surgeon who saved my life serving drinks at this wedding?" The air changed. Conversations nearby stopped. Forks paused in mid-air. My mother released my wrist like she'd touched fire. My father's face drained of color, and across the ballroom, the groom, my sister's future husband, turned toward us in confusion, because the man standing in front of me was his father. And not just the groom's father, but the reason this entire wedding existed at this level of luxury in the first place. The investors, the venue connections, the business reputation, all of it traced back to him, Mr. Arvind Mehra. I hadn't recognized him at first, because the last time I saw him, he was unconscious on an operating table, monitors screaming, blood pressure crashing, the surgical team seconds away from losing him. Now, he stood straight, strong, alive, and looking directly at me. The silence around us spread table by table like a wave. My sister, still in her bridal gown across the stage area, frowned in confusion. My mother tried to recover first. "Sir," she laughed nervously, "you must be mistaken. She's never been a doctor. She barely finished." "I remember the hands that stopped my bleeding," he said calmly. Not loud, but final, like a verdict. You don't forget the person who keeps you alive. My throat tightened. Memories hit me in flashes. Bright surgery lights, gloved hands, the smell of antiseptic, the tension of a collapsing artery, the lead surgeon shouting for clamps while I held pressure with everything I had. It had been a 6-hour emergency procedure after his car accident. Complicated, messy, critical. I assisted, but more than that, I had made one call that changed the outcome when a vessel tore wider than expected. A risky clamp placement. One chance. He survived. My father stepped in front of me slightly, blocking the truth like he could physically push the truth away. "With respect," he said tightly, "this is not the place for jokes." Mr. Mara's expression hardened. "Do I look like I'm joking?" No one answered. He turned and signaled to someone near the front, his personal assistant, who immediately walked over. "Bring my phone," he said. My mother's voice sharpened. "This is becoming inappropriate." But nobody was listening to her anymore. Guests were watching now, openly, the way people watch when they sense something real is about to break through something fake. My sister stepped down from the stage, dress gathered in her hands. "What is happening?" she demanded. Her fiancé looked between us, confused. "Dad?" Mr. Mara didn't look at his son. He looked at me. "2 years ago," he said, projecting now so more could hear, "this young woman stood in an operating room for 6 hours and refused to step away even when the senior residents rotated out." My chest felt tight. I hadn't told that story to anyone outside the hospital, not even my family, especially not my family. "Sir," my mother cut in sharply, "she worked at a hospital cafeteria during a student program. Maybe you saw her there." A few guests chuckled politely, wanting tension to dissolve, but he didn't smile. My chest was open. My heart was in that room. I know the difference between a cafeteria worker and a surgeon. The assistant returned and handed him the phone. He tapped, scrolled, turned the screen outward. A hospital photo. Surgery team lineup. Masks down, exhausted faces. And me, thinner, younger, standing at the edge, still in scrubs, staring at the camera like I hadn't slept in 2 days. My sister's mouth opened. My father stopped breathing. My mother whispered, "No." But it was already too late to pull the moment back, because Mr. Mara didn't lower the phone. He didn't soften the truth. He reached to the nearby stand, picked up the wireless microphone meant for wedding speeches, and turned it on with a small click that somehow sounded louder than the music had all night. The soft background orchestra track was still playing. He gestured once. The band stopped. Just like that. 200 guests turned fully toward him. "When you survive something you were not supposed to survive," he said into the microphone, voice steady and resonant, "you make it a habit to remember the people who stood between you and death." You could feel the room leaning in, curiosity replacing celebration. My hands were still holding the tray. I realized I hadn't moved. The glasses trembled slightly from the pulse in my wrists. My mother took one step toward the stage. "Please," she hissed toward me, not smiling anymore, "go inside, right now." I didn't move. For the first time in years, I didn't obey immediately. Mr. Mara turned slightly and extended his arm, pointing directly at me where I stood beside the guest tables in a server uniform. "This young woman," he said clearly, "is Dr. Maya Rao." The title hit the air like a crack of thunder. Doctor. Not helper, not disappointment, not the quiet daughter, not the embarrassment. Doctor. A ripple of sound moved through the guests, whispers, surprise, disbelief. My sister's bouquet slowly lowered in her hands. My father shook his head like reality could be denied through repetition. "That's not true," he said under his breath. "That's not true." Mr. Mara continued. "She was part of the emergency surgical team that operated on me after my accident. My lead surgeon told me afterward, if not for her intervention at one critical moment, I would not be standing here today." My throat burned, because I remembered that moment. The clamp, the hesitation, the decision. the risk I took that could have ended my career before it started, but instead saved a life. I asked the hospital later who she was, he went on. They told me she was one of their top international fellows. International fellow. Studied abroad. Graduated with honors. Everything my parents told people never happened. My mother tried to laugh into the silence. She exaggerates things, she said loudly to nearby guests. Students assist, they don't. Mr. Mara turned his head toward her slowly. Ma'am, he said calmly into the microphone, when a surgeon's hand is inside your chest cavity, you don't call that exaggeration. A few guests gasped. Someone near the back actually started clapping once, awkwardly, then stopped. My tray suddenly felt unbearably heavy. I set it down on the nearest table. No one stopped me. No one told me to go back to the kitchen, because the entire power balance of the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. My sister looked at me now like she was seeing me for the first time in her life. Why? She asked softly, almost to herself. Did nobody tell me this? My parents didn't answer. They couldn't, because the next thing he said destroyed the last piece of their story. Mr. Mara adjusted the microphone slightly, not rushed, not dramatic, just precise, like a man used to speaking facts that carry weight. After my recovery, he said, I personally requested the hospital send a formal commendation letter for Dr. Maya Rao. My mother's eyes widened instantly. My father's jaw locked. I do that every time, he continued, when someone goes beyond their duty in a life or death case. That letter was signed by the surgical director and delivered to her listed permanent address. Delivered. Not emailed, not archived. Delivered. He turned his head and looked directly at my parents now. I believe that address was this family's home. The silence that followed felt different. Not shocked, exposed. Because truth had just grown teeth. My heart started pounding harder, because now I understood where this was going. I remembered the letter. I never received it. I had waited for weeks back then, checking my student portal, my email, my mailbox at the residency dorm. Nothing came. The coordinator told me it was couriered to your permanent address. My mother spoke too quickly. We never got any letter. Mr. Mara gave a small nod, like he expected that answer. Yes, he said calmly. That's what I thought you might say. He gestured again to his assistant. Another folder appeared. Thin, cream-colored, official seal visible even from a distance. I keep copies, he said, of every commendation I request, with delivery confirmation. He opened the folder, held up a document. My name printed across the top. Hospital crest, signature, seal, date. My legs felt weak for a moment. Guests leaned sideways in their chairs trying to read it from across the hall. The courier required a signature, he continued, voice steady. And according to the delivery record, he glanced down at the attached slip, it was received and signed for by Mrs. Kavita Rao. My mother. A sound escaped her throat. Not a word, just air. My sister slowly turned toward her. Mom, she whispered. My father looked at the floor, because he knew. He absolutely knew. Mr. Mara lowered the document slightly, but kept the microphone near his mouth. I assumed, he said, that the family of a young surgeon would be proud, that they would frame it. He paused. But when I asked Dr. Rao at a medical conference months later why she never acknowledged it, she told me she never saw it. I closed my eyes briefly. That conference hallway, that exact conversation. I had smiled politely and said, maybe it was lost in transit. He had looked puzzled even then. Now the puzzle was solved. 200 wedding guests were staring at my parents like strangers. Respect had reversed direction in real time. My sister's fiancé, the groom, looked stunned. "You hid this?" he asked them quietly. My mother tried one last defense. "We didn't want her becoming arrogant," she said weakly. "We wanted her to stay grounded." Grounded by humiliation, by erasure, by turning a surgeon into waitstaff at her own sister's wedding. Mr. Mara's voice lowered and somehow became more powerful. "No," he said. "You wanted her invisible." The words didn't sound loud, but they landed heavy. The kind of heavy that bends a room. My mother's shoulders slowly dropped, like the fight had drained out of her all at once. My father looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. Around them, guests who had been laughing and celebrating minutes earlier were now watching like witnesses to something raw and irreversible. Mr. Mehta turned away from them and looked back at me. "Dr. Maya Rao," he said into the microphone, voice warm now, respectful, certain. "Would you please come stand beside me?" My breath caught. For years I had imagined being recognized, but never like this. Never here. Never in the middle of the one place my parents tried hardest to shrink me. My first instinct was still the old one. Refuse, step back, disappear, make it easier for everyone else. But something inside me, something tired of being folded smaller, said no. Walk. So I walked. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. Every step across that ballroom floor felt like walking out of a shadow that had followed me my whole life. No one stopped me. No one redirected me. No one handed me a tray. When I reached the stage, he stepped aside and gave me the center position, not symbolically, but physically, in front of everyone. "This," he said, turning to the guests, "is the doctor who gave me more years of life, years that allowed me to see my son get married today." He began to clap. One pair of hands, then another, then 10, then the entire hall. The applause rose, real, sustained, undeniable, not polite, grateful. My eyes burned. I wasn't crying from sadness, it was something else. The shock of finally being seen without disguise. My sister stood a few feet away, still holding her bouquet, staring at me with a complicated mix of confusion, guilt, and something that looked like awakening. "I didn't know," she said quietly when the applause softened. "I know," I answered gently, because she truly didn't. They had hidden her from me, too, just in a different way. Mr. Mehta leaned slightly toward the microphone again. "And, since this is a wedding," he added, "I believe gratitude should be public." He reached into his jacket and removed a small envelope. "I funded a surgical training grant this year, international specialization. It will now be awarded in Dr. Rao's name, starting with her as its first director." The room reacted again, surprised murmurs, impressed whispers. My parents looked like they'd been turned to stone, not because of the honor, but because control had slipped completely out of their hands and into mine. I took the microphone carefully. My voice trembled at first, then steadied. I was taught growing up that success should be quiet and sacrifice should be invisible. I glanced at my parents, not with anger, but with closure. But saving a life is not invisible, and neither is surviving being underestimated. I handed the microphone back. No attack, no revenge speech, just truth. Later that night, after the ceremony recovered and the celebration slowly restarted, my phone buzzed with 3 messages from unknown numbers: hospital directors, conference organizers, an old mentor. Recognition travels fast when it finally gets permission. As I stepped outside for air, still in the server uniform I had arrived in, but no longer feeling like staff, my sister came out behind me. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For believing the version of you they gave me. she replied. I smiled softly. That version doesn't exist anymore. And for the first time in my life, it was true.